Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Charity Charge Show. I'm your host, Stephen Garton. Today, I'm very excited to have a really interesting guest and talk about everything that they're doing in the nonprofit world since 1984. Our guest today is Joe Scarano, who is the founder of Araize. Thank you so much for being here, Joe.
Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate your time and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I definitely want to uncover throughout this episode your passion and the reasons why you started Araize. But before we do it, I actually just want to jump right in for people that are listening. And, we're really trying to use this podcast more and more to educate nonprofit leaders, executive directors, CFOs of nonprofits, board members, people thinking of starting a nonprofit, on all the ways that they can improve and optimize their nonprofit organization. So, could you let us know, Joe, what is Araize and what problem ultimately and pain point are you helping to solve for nonprofit organizations?
Sure. Well, we're a software company. We provide back office financial solutions to the nonprofit market. We have a full suite of SaaS solutions, including accounting, fundraising, CRM, and payroll. The business, as you mentioned, started in 1984. At that time, I was a partner in a CPA firm. Was a licensed CPA in New York, and the firm I worked for, the majority of our clients were nonprofits. So my partner at the time, and again, we're talking about the 80s, so this is just the introduction of PCs and computing to the general public, which was not available before then. So my partner at the time said we should write software for nonprofits because there's really nothing out there, and so we started a new business. At the time, it was called IDS, and I'm based in New York. And we released our first products in 1985, an accounting application and I hate to date myself, but in the DOS environment on PCs. Um, the application grew from that point. I actually left the business in 1991 to pursue some other things, but then we came back in 1997. In 91, I moved to North Carolina with my family, started a different business. In 97, I was approached by my former partners to come back to New York to help out with what was still IDS. Turns out that we just worked out an arrangement where the company that we started in North Carolina merged with the New York corporation and founded Araize. So Araize was founded in 1997 in North Carolina. We introduced new products before 2000. Then we started developing our cloud solution in 2008 and released FastFund Online in 2012. And so right now, Araize is still the only software solution out there for nonprofits that incorporates accounting, fundraising, and payroll in a single solution. It is a modular system, so you pick and choose which applications you need, but it's a single point of entry for all financial transactions. Essentially everything that a nonprofit needs to manage their back office financials. So we feel that we're filling a need for affordable, comprehensive financial management softwares for nonprofits. The majority of companies out there, nonprofits, are using off-the-shelf packages that really don't meet their fiscal needs when it comes to nonprofit accounting. Nonprofits have very unique reporting requirements, and anything that you get off the shelf is not really designed for those kinds of reports, especially when you have to incorporate grant reporting, compliance with government regulations as it relates to nonprofits. So our software meets those needs, and ultimately it's to help a nonprofit become more sustainable, helping them manage their programs and more transparent to their grantors and funding sources.
Awesome. It's a huge testament, obviously, for this company to be around for so long and continue to be in business and grow and serve so many nonprofit organizations. Can you talk about a little bit of the the diversity of the nonprofit sector? And I'm sort of asking you, I guess within this question of a question, um, there are plenty of nonprofit organizations that maybe are doing $100,000 a year, $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, and then on up, to foundations that, have billions of dollars. What kind of spot does this software, what kind of range or size of organizations are you able to add value and help with?
Well, we have a full suite of applications that could cost a nonprofit as low as $300 a year that incorporates basic accounting and donor management. And when I say basic accounting, it's essentially cash based accounting. It's really the smaller nonprofits that the majority of their funding is coming from private donors. They might, if it's less than 50,000 a year in gross revenue, they only have to file a 990N with the IRS. All nonprofits have to file an annual 990 to maintain their nonprofit status. And if they're above 50,000, then it's a 990 EZ, and it becomes even more complicated. If their revenue is over 250, then it's a full 990. And what makes this reporting unique is a nonprofit has to split all of their expenses into what's referred to as functional expenses, whether they're expenses for program-based activity or their support services, which is management in general and fundraising. So our customer base ranges from small mom and pop, nonprofits that serve a small constituency and might be generating 20 or 30,000 a year in revenue, but they still need to know, acknowledge their donors, send out donor receipts, demonstrate to the general public the kind of work they're doing in the community, and have accurate financial statements. And then we have organizations that receive federal or state funding, and they typically fall under the requirement of having to do an annual audit. So, because I'm a former practicing CPA, we've built into the application a number of internal controls that will help when it comes time for them to do their audit. So, honestly, we have every imaginable type of nonprofit: religious organizations, schools, homeless shelters, food pantries, YMCAs, YWCAs, boys clubs, girls clubs, foreign missionary organizations, alumni associations, small government agencies. So anyone that kind of falls under what we would call the umbrella of nonprofit fund accounting is a good fit for our application. I mean, there are certain nonprofits that are much more complicated in terms of their needs, that might need a more ERP, ranked system that we might not have all of the requirements that they have, but for the most part, we fill the bill for proper fiscal management.
Thank you for sharing all that. I'd say one anecdote. I have to check my ego because I definitely have found someone that in you that has seen more than I have. One of the fun things that, yeah, we've been operating Charity Charge now for over 9 years, and what has been really fun and interesting and all about the learnings is the diversity of organizations, variety of, obviously sizes, but specifically, the missions and ultimately, the work that they're doing. And it's been really cool to see all the different types of organizations. So you have definitely seen more than I have, and that's cool. I've always joked that I've seen more organizations than anyone else out there, but that is clearly not the case. So thank you for help checking my ego here. I've got more to learn. Um,
Oh,
Talk
no
to me.
problem.
A lot of organizations. So, like, if we start, for example, thinking about the nonprofits that we work with, a lot of them are using QuickBooks Online. And I mean, I'm even on your website, and I see like you have an FAQ here, which I was looking at. Uh, you know, Kind of talking about like what QuickBooks is and how your solution though really takes it that next step. So if someone who's running an organization is using QuickBooks today, talk about how your software differs from that and really could be an improvement upon QuickBooks if you kind of
Sure.
compare and contrast that.
Sure. Well, QuickBooks Online is, I mean, it's a great application. A lot of people love it. Some people don't love it as much, but it's the number one accounting application in the world, and for a reason. I mean, it's a solid product. The problem is it doesn't do nonprofit accounting. You have to use classes or tags or other tricks to try to get it to do grant reporting. To do You can't do fund accounting. That's impossible. When you have your year-end closing entry of your excess or deficiency for the nonprofit, it gets closed out to owner's equity. And even if you have the QuickBooks for nonprofit version, it still says owner's equity. And so nonprofits don't have owner equity, they have net assets. So as a nonprofit, you have to segregate your financial activity by two classes of what's referred to as net assets. Is it restricted or is it unrestricted? And so QuickBooks doesn't allow you to segregate your balance sheet by net asset class or restriction. So there's only one year-end closing entry. So right from there, there's an advantage of using FastFund. The next step is your functional expenses. You need to use classes or tags to segregate your program activity from your support services and fundraising. That's a required report for all nonprofits, the statement of functional expenses. And so it's not easy to do that in QuickBooks. And what we find is a lot of QuickBooks users will reach out to us because they've hit that brick wall where they've tried to do what they need to do in QuickBooks. Their auditors might make a recommendation. They might have an internal control deficiency on their audit report because of their accounting system, and so they reach out to find something that's really geared more for their industry. Being a nonprofit. And there are a lot of other things, such as tracking donors. A nonprofit has to segregate their revenue by, grant revenue, program service revenue, fundraising, event revenue, and donations. There's really no easy way to do that in QuickBooks. Plus the acknowledgement of donors is not easy in QuickBooks. You want to, as a nonprofit, if your main source of revenue is donations, you want to make sure that whoever donates to you is recognized and thanked for that donation. I mean, the last thing you want to do is ignore someone who gives you a $5 check or a $5,000 check. You want to make sure that you appreciate that donation so they donate again. So when you have a system that is built in automated receipts where you can thank the donor, where you could upload from your website all of your individual donations and it gets credited to the donor record, where you can send out year-end donor statements, automatically and not have to dump everything into a spreadsheet and try to filter and sort to try to find your donors. It just makes their lives a lot easier. I mean, we always preach, saving time. If you need to generate a financial report for your grantor and you're not able to put in your grant budget in QuickBooks, you're doing it in a spreadsheet. Whereas if you have an accounting application that can accommodate grant budget reporting, it's all in the system for you.
Excellent.
There are a number of other things, coming from an audit background and as a CPA, there's internal controls that are somewhat lacking in QuickBooks. So, again, depending on the size of the organization and what kind of controls they want to implement within the organization, our systems help them with those types of internal controls. Whereas, something like QuickBooks, their internal controls are somewhat lacking. And, again, not to say that it will promote any kind of fraud or embezzlement, but if you have specific controls in place, it does help, prevent that kind of risk within the organization.
Makes total sense. I think that, one of the things we've seen, obviously, with the success we've had with Charity Charge, with our especially our flagship product, the credit card program for nonprofits. Nonprofit organizations need specific tools and solutions, and they've generally often been completely overlooked by the for-profit industry. And the more that I, get out there, for people listening about it, these are some rough numbers, but in the United States, there's about 34 to 35 million small to medium businesses, and there's about 2 million nonprofits. So, it does make sense that kind of that's where a lot of the market is when you think about software and solutions. And it's awesome that you've created specific software to help nonprofits in this regard. So one of the things also on that I wanted to touch on and also get your perspective, being on the technology side of this for so long, um, is really kind of explaining and talking about the benefits of this SaaS solution versus the hosted solution. Generally speaking, and this goes back 6 7 years ago, speaking with a friend actually who had built software. Um, for nonprofits on the case management side. And she made an interesting comment to me that seems to really ring out. And it's obviously somewhat of a generalization. But she said, in general, nonprofit organizations, when it comes to best practices, technology, in general, on average, are about 10 years behind the for profit world, right? And so, for example, I know that a bunch of organizations that we work with are still using QuickBooks Desktop. So,
Mhm.
could you talk about the benefits, and both for, your product if they're using Arrays, but also other technologies that a nonprofit might want to adapt? What is the promise of SaaS in the cloud, and how is that ultimately helping to make um these solutions better for the nonprofit versus the sort of traditional legacy hosted solutions?
Well, the number one thing is security and reliability. Granted, you need an internet connection, and it's hard to believe, but there are still parts of the country that don't have adequate and reliable internet. So, assuming that you have that, having a SaaS solution is much more secure and safe and reliable than having your applications on a desktop. Case in point, you have a thunderstorm and you get flooded out and your computer gets flooded, and that's it. I mean, if you don't have a backup, another computer with all your stuff on it, you're pretty much dead in the water. Whereas with a SaaS solution, you've got an infrastructure with multiple redundancies, multiple backup systems, safeguards that as long as you can connect to the internet, you can get your data, you can do your work, and you can do it from anywhere. You're not stuck in your office, to one, desktop computer or one laptop. So it's kind of backwards from the start of computing. The start of computing, was mainframes and minis, and everyone had dumb terminals on their desk. Everything was being processed somewhere else. And then the PC revolution came, and everyone had the power of a computer on their desk. And now that's completely replaced by the internet. I mean, you know how much work do you do on your phone? you know, and how much people do on their iPad, and you whatever you need is accessible for you now, as long as you can connect, whether it's wireless or through the internet, Wi-Fi, you know through your phone signal, you have access to all of your data, all of your programs, and with the security of knowing that it's being backed up. Whoever's maintaining it is keeping the software up to date. You don't have to worry about getting patches for the software. uh, QuickBooks Desktop is being sunsetted. They Intuit um, stopped supporting it, and now they've extended it a little bit. But essentially, you can't get updates anymore for certain versions of QuickBooks Desktop. So they're trying to move everyone to the cloud, which is essentially what we did back in 2012. We sunsetted our Windows product, stopped supporting it, and our users at the time had to move to the cloud.
Got it. I appreciate, yeah, makes sense. I appreciate you sharing that. I want to kind of ask what might be one more question specific to Arrays, and then I want to get into some more broader perspective that you might be able answer some questions about the nonprofit industry and provide some advice and lessons learned to any nonprofit leader that's listening to this. Something though that I think is really cool and would be really helpful that comes out of your Araize basically is that you provide support, right? And I think that a lot of individuals, if they're using QuickBooks or doing it in a spreadsheet, they're overwhelmed, they're confused, they don't know how to set stuff up properly. Can you talk about, like, in addition to the core, like, actual software piece, right, that can help track and manage and automate a lot of things, from the perspective, if I'm we're based here in Austin, so if I'm the executive director of Austin Parks Foundation, and I'm really interested in this. It sounds like you're hitting on some pain points that we have in this example. um, but what would onboarding look like, and how does Arrays help make sure that my organization is successful both in the setup and then ongoing if we have questions or issues?
Sure, sure. Well, with the licensing of our software, we provide free onboarding. Depending on which modules they license, accounting, fundraising, or payroll, we allocate certain number of amount of hours, to help them get up and running. So, if someone has all three applications, they get up to 3 hours of free onboarding. So the onboarding process, it starts with evaluating their current systems. What are they coming from? Do they want to convert data from that existing system? So data conversion is something completely separate. We do have the utilities built into the program where they can actually do the data conversion on their own. We have utilities where they can import their chart of accounts, they can import all of their names, their vendors and clients and donors, and import all their transactions. The majority of our clients don't have the expertise to do that, so they will, hire us out, and contract us to do a data conversion. If they don't need a data conversion, the onboarding process um, with accounting is identifying their fiscal period that they are making the transition. We've been really busy this month because a lot of nonprofits have June 30th year ends. So if they want to start July 1, 25, their start of time would be June 30th, 25. If they're not converting data, we just examine their current system, take a look at their chart of accounts, make the required modifications to their account structure to accommodate the ability to track their funds, their programs, their grant codes into our system. So, for example, with QuickBooks, if they're using classes become an account segment within our system. So we take their class list, we take their chart of accounts list, and we assist in importing that data into FastFund to create their chart of accounts. We then take a look at their beginning balances, which are their ending balances at June 30th, 25. If they have vendors and clients, we assist in exporting that from QuickBooks and importing it into FastFund. If they have donors, we import the donor names. If it's payroll, we import the payroll and employee names, put in the year-to-date information. So we try to get them to the point of, here's all the data that you need to start entering transactions on July 1st, 2025. You've got your names in the system, you've got your chart of accounts, you've got your beginning balances. The first check you write in July or the first receipt you receive in July, you're able to enter into the system. Depending on the client, it could take a day, back and forth, and after that free onboarding, we offer training, and we also have a number of resources available to our clients, videos, training videos. We do regular training webinars that we record that are available on demand. And on top of that, we provide ongoing customer support. That's one of the things you mentioned it before I had a chance to mention it, but that's one of the key differentiators between working with Intuit and QuickBooks and FastFund and Arrays, because when you reach out to Intuit for support, you're not going to get the level of expertise that you would get from our personnel here at Araize, because our support staff are accountants and CPAs.
Wow. That's really awesome. I really appreciate you sharing that. That is would be a huge differentiator. I'm really glad we highlighted on that. I want to, Joe, I want to talk now a little bit more broadly about your perspective on overall the nonprofit sector, and obviously lean on your history over the decades here. Report that came out more recently from Giving USA, which I track and kind of see the headline for 2024. I'm just kind of reading right off of here. Charities received $592.5 billion in donations in 2024, which was a 3.3% increase in 2023 adjusted for inflation. In this report, obviously it takes a while for them to compile it, but this is kind of the most recent data that charitable giving in the US is at about almost $600 billion. And what I found interesting in here was that it basically stayed true to some of the traditional trends. So for organizations that are listening to this also and thinking about like maybe where to raise money from or where you focus as you try to diversify your fundraising sources, what I thought was interesting is basically they said the share of giving by each source remains stable. 2024 individuals accounted for the largest share, 66%, followed by foundations at 19%, bequests at 8%, corporations at 7%. Now, this is all, for 2024, Joe. And I know obviously, nonprofits generally, I think, have been concerned this year about budget cuts and just like the state of, will this kind of, this momentum continue? So I'm just curious, are people, um, are people being irrational? Like, what's your sense of charitable giving as it is now? How does that compare back if you think about like, the 80s, the 90s, and if someone's running a an organization, um, what do they do to be proactive and try to, navigate, uncertainty here?
Yeah, that's a very relevant question given the current environment, especially with a lot of grant funding, federal grant funding being cut or eliminated. It puts a lot of nonprofits in a very, very difficult situation. When they had approvals for grants for their specific programs, and then all of a sudden funds are cut. I wish I had an easy answer, to that. Most important thing a nonprofit has to do is communicate to the community, to the constituency, the work they're doing, the benefit that they're providing, because the nonprofits fill a void that is not being filled by governments. It's not being filled by corporate world. There's a reason they're the third largest industry in the U.S. is because they're filling a need that is required, that is not being filled by the federal government and or state governments and or corporations. So when it comes to um, donations and how do they maintain that level, a lot of it is education and communication. Making sure that the general community that they're serving understands what they're doing, the benefit to the community, and how the community would suffer without them providing these services. So it's as I mentioned, as I said earlier, someone gives you a donation, you want to thank them for it. As small as it could may possibly be, that you take $5 donations times 1,000. It doesn't sound like a lot, but um, it's what's helps a nonprofit be sustainable, especially the small community service based nonprofits.
And I think that I'll just jump in my perspective here. Obviously, getting to know you, and obviously more so learning about what you provide and how you help nonprofits. I think organizations being able to first internally organize, track, manage, and make sense of the data that their employees, board members can make smart decisions based on accurate reporting. Is critical, and that's what your solution with Arrays, help solve for. And then having those numbers to be able to report back or share in whatever communication touch points, donor reports, etc. You know, is right there is really critical to provide that feedback loop to supporters. So I think that ties in really well. I'm also curious, and now this is a little bit of a selfish question. You know, Charity Charge we've been running for over 9 years now. We've been in market. Although I was in the sort of idea concept phase for a couple of years before that, right? And it's amazing the percent of businesses that and nonprofits as well that go out of business, right? That don't survive a year, 5 years, 10 years, right? Here you are, many decades into this, and I'm just curious, like from your perspective, how are you different now as a leader and CEO of your company? And yeah, what's your perspective? Like, what do you think has been your uh, secret sauce to be able to stay in business and grow over the years? Which is, I mean, you are representing a tiny, tiny, tiny percent of all entrepreneurs to still be in business for many decades. It's quite a feat.
Well, hard work and good people. Obviously, you got to be smart. We never had any outside funding. We've always been self-funded, and we've been bootstrapping and continue to bootstrap. But we're extremely successful, very profitable business. We're relatively small in terms of personnel, but everyone understands our mission. And as I said, without the people around me, I wouldn't be here. And so I owe it all to them. A lot of it is a passion for what you do. Uh, and when I started in the accounting world, the firm I worked for specialized in nonprofits. You go to their offices. We did audits every year, and you see what they're doing, and most of them don't get paid very much, and yet they have a passion for the work that they do. They're helping people, and they're not obviously not in it for the money, and so that kind of rubs off. And it's like it's not all about the money. We had a good idea, and we were able to execute it and bring in the people that help me execute the plan. It kind of mushrooms from there. We get a lot of business from referrals. We actually have people who have been with us since the 80s, and it's kind of hard to believe, but working with the same CFO for nonprofits in New York that were one of our very first clients. So it's for us, it's really really rewarding, and you obviously have to have a lot of luck, and persistence. There were some tough times, but we stuck with with our mission, and we're able to get through that. And now we're in a we feel we're as a company we're in a really really great position. And we're making great contacts. And people like in Charity Charge. We're small. We don't spend a lot of money on marketing. That's why you never heard of us. But there have been enough nonprofits out there that have heard of us, enough accountants and CPAs that know about us. That keeps us going and keeps us growing. And that what keeps us going is the people that we work for. We work for our clients, and when we get thank you notes from them, emails about I just had my board meeting, first board meeting with FastFund system, and they can't believe what I'm giving them in terms of financial statements, which I never was able to give them before, and all it took was a couple of clicks, and I got these reports, and it was like, oh, I just finished my audit, and the auditor was like so happy with the audit trails and everything. It's like, thank you so much. So,
That's refreshing
it's,
for sure. I've
yeah,
I've talked to a lot of accountants, and they're always getting stuff at the last minute and it's not organized. Yeah, what a 180 for your clients to be able to share that are using your software.
yeah, it's great. I always preach right tools for the right job. I still go out and cut my lawn, once a week. I have a very small postage stamp, front lawn that I cut. So, I have a little lawnmower. But if I, had to cut the 14th fairway, at the neighborhood golf course, I wouldn't be using my push mower. So you have a riding mower. If baseball field, football field, you're going to cut the lawn with a riding mower. So a plumber's not going to use a carpenter's tools, and a carpenter's not going to use a plumber's tools. So if you're an accountant and you are responsible for managing the books of your local nonprofit, you need the right tools so you can do your job efficiently.
Well said. No, I really appreciate that. I think we're in a good spot to conclude this episode. And Joe, I just want to thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing the insights
Thanks,
of your many
Stephen.
many decades of years
Thanks.
in the experience. Excuse me, in this industry with Araize. For everyone listening, I highly recommend you check out Araize. You can go to their website and book a demo. We'll include links. You know, in the description for this online and in our newsletter. And once again, Joe, CEO, founder of Araize, thank you so much for being on the Charity Church podcast today.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate you having me.